Yes, now it's loud and clear. Please continue. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good morning, good night, good afternoon from Chile, from the other side of the Pacific Ocean. I'm really happy to be here and to share some information and thoughts and also some reflections on ongoing processes with you today. So I would like to talk about what we are currently doing within the board of the International Committee for the Conservation of Industrial Heritage, TICI. And I've structured my presentation into 6 major points. So I will start talking about what is actually TICI and how it came into being. Then the great challenge of TICI becoming a truly global organization. And of course also some critical reviews we are currently discussing, which come from many continents around the world. As I'm currently living in Latin America, I will speak in a little bit more detail about some cases here in Chile and in Latin America, and then hop over to Europe again before concluding on some key critiques and challenges that we may discuss further. And yes, so let's start. The title of my presentation is a critical review of the Nice-Nitagen Charter, which was published in 2003. There are many other charters and declarations on the specific conservation of industrial heritage as a very specific type within cultural heritage. And you can find all that, of course, on TICI's internet website. So I think it's always a practical thing to show you where you can find the information. I have a final sheet also where I have put some more information and some bibliographic references, so in order you can check back at a later stage, specifically given that English is not my mother language and Chinese less, so that's a useful tool. So we have the Nice-Nitagen Charter on the industrial heritage here in different languages. The charter was published and ratified at the General Assembly of TICI in the year 2003, which was held in Russia, and it was drafted before by the then editor of the TICI Bulletin on a draft which came from Scotland, and it was structured in these 7 major points. So a definition of what is actually understood by industrial heritage, the values of industrial heritage, the importance of identification and recording and research on industrial heritage, legal protection is a great issue, of course, maintenance and conservation, education and training, presentation and interpretation. The background of the need for this charter was that then, at that moment, 2003, industrial heritage was not yet that much considered actually part of cultural heritage, so there was a real need to set up some guiding principles, and that was the big success of this charter until today, that this was a first internationally drafted charter on the specificities of industrial heritage. Although it, of course, came from the European context, of the 70s, when Europe, and particularly Western Europe, suffered great strikes of deindustrialization due to the global shift of industrial production to other parts of the world. And in the regions, and we will have some further information on the Ruhr region by my dear German colleague after my speech, there was a huge need to know what to do with all these changes and what to do with the sites and how to give orientation to people for the future. So it was in the European context that all this started, and even Tiki came into being also with the first Congress held in Iron Bridge in 1973. We have also more declarations and charters. There's, for example, the joint ICOMOS and Tiki principles for the conservation of industrial heritage sites and structures and areas and landscapes. This is from 2011. There's already some more reflection in there on the different scales of sites, not only on buildings as such, but also on structures and infrastructures and landscapes. So you can see that there has been an evolution also. And there has been even a best practice handbook published by Tiki in 2012, which is this one. So all this is now a lot of years ago, of course. The Nizhny Tagil Charter had its 20th birthday last year, and we are in a very much changing world, and Tiki is also changing quite a lot. So what we did when Miles Oglethorpe became president of Tiki back in 2018, and myself I took on as Secretary General in 2019, was to open up our membership to more global scope. This was reflected, for example, in this membership campaign, which started in 2020 and is ongoing. So we have all these posters translated into a lot of languages, and the most recent one is traditional Chinese, which you have here. And, well, I have already said that Tiki came into being from Western European contexts and then stretched around the world. You have on the upper right-hand side here the book covers of the Congress proceedings of the first three Congresses, which were held in 73 in Iron Bridge, 75 in Bochum, in the Ruhr region, and in 78 in Sweden, in Stockholm. And I should draw your attention on the three bigger pictures I put here, which is the first one at the left, the first Congress Tiki ever held in Asia, which was precisely in Taiwan in 2012, organized by Zhao Weilin. We had a first World Congress of Tiki held in Latin America in Chile in the year 2018, also a major point. And the last one we held was in 2022 in Canada. The next one will be in 2025, next year in Sweden again. And what is interesting about the Congress themes is that these are also evolving to a more global scope. So, for example, the Taiwan Congress was titled Post-Colonialism and Reinterpretation of Industrial Heritage. In the Montreal Congress 2 years ago, we had a very huge session which was running over 3 days, which was titled Industrial Heritage from a Global Perspective, where we invited a lot of colleagues from around the world to contribute with their reflections on the need to reconceptualize industrial heritage, to include the specific viewpoints of the very specific situations on the ground around the world, which are of course completely different in countries like Chile or Africa when you compare them with countries where all the fundamental declarations have been drafted. So coming into a bit more detail on the critical review and the critiques that are pushed forward by colleagues from outside Europe, we have these very interesting 2 declarations from Asia, which I of course had to quote here. The first one is also way back already, 2011, from the network of the Modern Asian Architects Network that are pushing forward specific viewpoints from Asia concerning industrial heritage. And we also have the declaration of Ani, which was signed in the context of the World Congress in 2012 in Taiwan. But of course, you are the experts for the situation in Asia. I have not been back to Taiwan since I have been there in the World Congress in 2012. I hope to be back at some point to continue these very interesting reflections from a global perspective on industrial heritage at some point. But today, of course, I would like to focus on the critiques that are coming from Latin America, because I'm really into this as the first point of my critical revision for hopping over to Europe again. So I will show you 4 cases to make some points to come around Chile, which is where I am now. And the conclusion of this will be to show you that the local realities really condition what is considered relevant and not relevant in terms of definitions and studying and so on, all the things that have to do with the conservation of industrial heritage. The 4 points are first on research, and then on community museums and sharing heritage locally. What does that mean? And also the concept which I discovered here in Latin American context, which I found really interesting, of insurgent heritage. And we also have some interesting activities going on even on the continental Latin American level. So doing research on industrial heritage in the Chilean context precisely, which is actually what I do, is not that easy, because I still find some people that consider that industrial heritage and even ruins are not at all heritage. It's not beautiful. It's a lot to do with imperialism, with destruction of indigenous lands, with destruction of natural environments. So it's not at all easy to talk about this in heritage terms. I'm very focused on the German electrification in Chile, which I found out that actually Berlin actors have been electrifying the most important port city on the western coast of South America, which is Valparaíso, which has been declared a World Heritage Site because of that also in 2003. And that is where I am sitting now. And it is actually almost 4 o'clock in the morning here. So excuse me when my English is not that good. I'm a little bit tired. So research is one point which is interesting here. It's getting stronger and stronger. We already have a very nice industrial heritage community all over the different parts of the country. And what is very interesting in the Chilean context, which is a very neoliberal country also, is that all that you can do and achieve with industrial heritage comes pretty much from the communities. So working with the local communities and with community museums is very, very, very important to make your point. Myself, I'm working here with a very small museum in the hinterland of the port city, where I have a dear colleague of mine who is an anthropologist and directing this small community museum. She is doing a lot of oral history with former workers of the hydroelectric plant, doing a lot of field trips, working a lot with school children, and she's actually not focused at all on industrial heritage, but also links industrial with natural heritage. So it's really an integrative understanding of what the local heritages of different kinds actually mean to the local people. It is, perhaps I stay at this point, one more sentence. It is not at all easy, especially in the Chilean context, to have this kind of cooperation from the academic world with the local communities, because the university system here in Chile is not really eager to promote this kind of cooperations. So it's really difficult for structural reasons, and it's also different because, of course, we talk very different languages. We have different kinds of speed. And it's a huge intellectual and also human effort to be working together. And it becomes, of course, even more complex when you want to talk about a site which has been built by German actors and should be considered actually a part of Berlin's industrial heritage also. So making connecting points between sites that are far away but very connected to the urban history of two cities is what I call sharing industrial heritage locally. So we did this with the students here in Valparaiso. We took on some models that have been developed already by myself 10 years ago when we started up the Berlin Center for Industrial Heritage. And we keep working with the people in Berlin. I will actually travel there in May to do some further coordination work. So we took on these very nice sheets to explain industrial heritage in the region and also specific sites, and adapted that to Chile. I did that in Spanish, but of course translated also back to German in order to promote this also in Berlin. And actually elaborated a whole characterization of all the different sites that have to do with the historic electrification process of the World Heritage city of Valparaiso, including the financing part. You know that the construction of infrastructure systems very much depend on capital, and specifically when it's large-scale infrastructures. We of course also included a sheet that explains that there is a local museum where you can go to know more. And we also managed to get some funding to write a book together between the museum and the university, combining the local history and the local oral memory with the research being done on the history of electrification, specifically on this case. And this allowing us to talk about sites that are actually not in the city center, but outside of the city center. That is already showing us that the need to cooperate between very different kinds of actors here in Chile is really big, and it is complex, and it gets even more complex in territories like this one. This one is in the south of Chile, a former coal mining region, in the Biobío region. The center of coal mining exploitation was a city called Lota. And what you have here is a different site. This is where all the railway infrastructure was being built into what was formerly untouched indigenous lands. So you can imagine the huge conflict that was there at the end of the 19th century, when the more Western-style capitalist logic of industrialization and modernization came into these lands, where people had completely different imaginaries and kinds of understanding the world and also cosmologies. Nevertheless, mining was a very important point here, and when the mine closed, the miners stood up and fought for the conservation of their industrial heritage, which is a very interesting point. There are also comparative studies ongoing between the Lota region and the Ruhr region in Germany, which is a colleague of mine who is working on that. Very interesting because there are a lot of, I could speak for hours about this, but I will not do that, of course. But what is an interesting point about how industrial heritage is done in this coal mining region of Lota in the south of Chile is that the the people, and particularly the women who stood up to fight for the conservation of their mining heritage, is that they openly want to talk about all the bad things and the suffering they have been living as miners, as workers, but specifically also as women in a context that was very male-dominated. And this is what they come up with, this beautiful work doing together with also young research who work with the local communities. We have been organizing a congress last October in Lhota to talk about the World Heritage nomination they are preparing. They are already on the tentative list for UNESCO World Heritage, so we listen to them and help a little bit with some recommendations. Well, and that's a little bit the situation in Chile and the main points that are ongoing in the discussion and where I learned a lot from. And in parallel, on the Latin American continental level, we started a project from Tiki with one of our commissions in order to map industrial heritage around Latin America and the Caribbean in a collaborative and open source way, where a lot of young people who are researching on industrial sites joined in. And here again, discussions are ongoing on specific points where colleagues tell us that they are not at all happy with some of the definitions and recommendations that are in the Nice-Nitagel-Charta or other guidelines. So hopping back to the European context, I'm struggling here with my dog. I'm so sorry for this. I hope you can't hear that. It's keeping my attention a little bit away. So hopping back to Europe, this is the other side of what we are doing here in Valparaíso. We work with the Berlin colleagues, I already mentioned them, of the Berlin Center for Industrial Heritage, who have also an online map going on as a project where my suggestion is and was and keeps being that they should enlarge the scale of their map to also include sites that have to do with Berlin's pioneering position on the electrification of the world, in order to also include sites like ours, which would be very helpful for us in order to have more attention being paid to the sites that really need some support and more publicity. They also highlight, of course, other types of industrial heritage. Breweries are very famous. I know you have some very